Hi, again, it's me, Clifford Bates, and welcome to our next session of reading Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. Um, we're going to be going, I say repeat, we're going to be using the Straussman edited, Robert Strassler's edited volume, the landmark Thucydides. We're going to be using the online version available at Google Books. I don't particularly like that because, like as I said, it kind of messes. Like I mentioned in the last video, these things always mess up. I wish they just had a PDF and it would be better in that sense, but no, they don't. Ebooks don't like PDF format. Right now, EPUBs and Mobies and those stuff mess around with font images and things like this, and it just screws it up. Um, uh, the book is better. The book is fantastic with the map connection. So please, if you're really interested in studying this, and doing it, you're going to be using this as kind of like a motivation to go look at this classic text. You I would use it, even though I would agree that the translation is dated. And it's and it in, the translation that they use here is very much dated in terms of it's the Crawley, famous Crawley translation, which is a good translation, but it assumes certain things like assumes that state, so they'll use the term states. Thucydides would never use that term because that's a concept that emerges only with the Renaissance. And nations, which they would talk about nations, peoples, ethnoi. These are the ethnic. These are like different ethnic populations, ethnoi, and that he will speak of the creation of the idea of the Hellenes, that is the Greek becoming the Greek nation. The question is there a nation in this sense? Now, the nation was never political in that sense in their time. It was an existent thing. It was a kind of social bond, but it was never really seen as a kind of a political unit. As it is kind of later in 19th century, and again, that's because of the state. I'm somebody. You can see my video on introduction of politics series, where I get, which is my course that I teach undergraduates at Russell University's American Studies program in spring semesters occasionally. Um, that this is, the evolutionary this nation state is a kind of evolutionary thing of the state, and it comes only because of the coining of the modern state in that sense. The ancient world did not think you could have a tribal monarchical ruler, but it would be ruled hegemonically, despotically, or at least through kin relationships, if not despotically, then through royal rule, through his power, through his control, as though this is his. He had to have enough. He had to do it through force or through contractual relationships of kin-based things. It was not political in a sense. It was not seen as a political community in the ancient world, or a polis in that sense, because the polis was limited to size. So that this little introduction to background to get right to chapter book one where we left off. Book one, chapter 45. We read 45. We're going to do reading 46, which is over here, the corner over here. You see the mouse. Meanwhile, the Corinthians. Basically, what happened? We're talking about we ended last time with the two sides. They were going to Athens. The Croatians went to Athens for help, and the Croatians gave their speech. Now, and then the Corinthians did. Now we left where they both ended their speech, and the Athenians kind of made a decision to help them, right? Help the Corinthians, because it was first they were saying, well, maybe their threat is good, but then the popular opinion, people, the masses, switched from saying, well, maybe the Corinthians, we should not help the Corinthians because what the Carthage, the Croatians, we should not help the Croatians because what the Corinthians said is true about their help, usefulness in preventing the war with Sparta. In that sense, and maybe we should listen to them. That's they made some good points. The Athenian argued in council, but then later deliberation, popular mood switched. The popular mood switched to supporting these people who are fighting our enemy, the Peloponnesian enemy of the. Yes, they might not have been as bad as before, but they're still kind of in our enemy camp. Okay, so and therefore they set out what to do. They sent the fleets, right? And they set a kind of a defensive alliance with the Croatians, and they sent a fleet out with to guide them, but only to attack, only to do something, only to defend Croatia. And if they're attacked by the uh, uh, um, um, uh, 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 Corinthians, to defend themselves and to prevent attack on the Croatia. In other words, so uh, now this is 46 now. We start. Meanwhile, the Croatians completed their preparations and sailed for Croatia with 150 ships. Of these, Aresa furnished 10, Megia 12, Lusa 10, Ambracia 27, Aricon 1, and Corinth herself 90. So it's an allied fleet of many of the Peloponnese, okay? And also some cities and some non-Peloponnese allied cities, Attican cities that were doing this. So therefore, and remember that's one of the criticisms that Corinth was taking from the allies, Athenian allies, in the Athenian kind of states. So therefore, and buying them and paying them to go help attack the Croatians, and therefore it's only fair for the Athenians to help in that sense, right? So each of these contingents had their own admiral. The Corinthians being under the command of Xenoclides, son of Euryclides. Euthoclides. Now, I apologize for my butchering of the Greek. I've always butchered words. This is something I've. Oh, you must be not educated. You're not. I've always had that problem with pronunciation and things like this as from a child onwards. Stutter. So please don't, when I read this, I know what it means, what the Greek words, names of these things are. I've always had pronunciation problems in this sense. So I'm going to butcher things. I always butcher names too. So therefore, this is kind of like one of the, oh God, that's why I don't like using people's names sometimes, because it's like, oh God, can I pronounce it or can I do it? Maybe I'm too American or English, and I said, I can't do foreign words or foreign sounds that you're not used to. Okay, the vocabulary. So the Corinthians are under this guy Xenoclides, and with four colleagues. Sailing from Luca, they made a land at the part of the continent opposite Croatia. Croatia. They anchored in the harbor of Synonym, Shy Miriam, in the territory of Theoprotis, above which, at some distance from the sea, lies the city of uh, 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 Epri, Epri, in the Aeolian district. By this city, the Arch, 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 Artrusian lake pours its water into the sea. So he's describing the location where it is, the water, lake, the land, the territory. That he's describing the geography of the situation, the terrain, into the sea. It gets its name from the river uh, um, Eroshon, which flows through Theoprotis and falls into the lake. There also the river Theomachus flows, forming the boundaries between Theoposos and Christine. And between, again, these in the book you link to the maps. I can't do this with the links. If I do this, look, if I click on this, what will happen is you'll see this. Watch. If I click on this, what will happen? Nothing. Okay, I want to click on it. I'm not worried about that. Between this, words between these rivers arise the point. Okay, there it is. This is what I'm saying. This is why I'm always terrified about doing this. It does it like that. Okay, and between these rivers arise the point of this of Shimerium, the place where the Corinthians and their allied fleet landed and had their set. Right. This part of the continent, the Corinthians now came to anchor and formed their encampment. 47. When the Corinthians saw the Croatians, the Croatians. Right? This is the conflict between Corinth and Croatia, right? Saw them coming. They manned 110 ships, commanded by Machetes, Asimides, and Eurybatus, and stationed themselves at one of the Zbota Isles, the islands around it, and 10 Athenian ships being present. On point, Eurycmi, they posted their land forces, and 1,000 hoplites who had come from Zakrinos, Thunos, to their assistance. Nor were the Corinthians on the mainland without their allies. In other words, they had some armies, they had navy ships, had ships responding, and they had armed like the hoplites. You know, the hoplite formations of the soldier. Hoplites are heavy armored soldiers, soldiers with heavy armor, shields, short spears, and attack spheres, which they can throw or poke, and like this, and short swords to kind of thrust and move. The barbarians flocked in large numbers to their assistance, but for pay, and the inhabitants of this part of the continent being allies of theirs, the allies of the Corinthians. Next, 48. When the Corinthians' preparations were completed, they took 3 days' provisions and put out from Criminium at night, ready for action. Sailing with dawn, they sighted the Croatian fleet out at sea and coming towards them. When they perceived each other, both sides formed in order of battle. The Corinthian right wing lay the Athenian ships, the rest of the line being occupied by their own vessels formed in 3 squadrons, each of them commanded by one of 3 admirals. Such was the Croatian formation. The Corinthian was as follows. On the right wing lay the Megarian and Ambraciot ships, and the center, the rest of the allies in order. But the left was composed of the best sailors in the Corinthian navy to encounter the Athenians, and the right wing of the Croatia. As soon as okay, no, I'm sorry. I have to go back. Hold on. This is 49 now. Next chapter. As soon as the signal was raised by either side, they joined battle. Both sides had a large number of hoplites on their decks and a large number of archers and javelin throwers. The old imperfect armament still prevailing. The sea fight was an obstinate one, though not remarkable in its science or another episteme, or its what it did, how to technique. Its technique. I'm sure the Greek. I think it's arche. Part of me would like to go do this in the Greek because it's better to get more accurate. But the other part of me knows that you'd be all bored. So therefore, indeed, it was more like a battle on land. So it was not like a sea battle as we understand. Thing. It was just basically like a land battle, but using boats and fighting from the boats against the other boats. Whenever they charged each other, the multitude and crush of the Trimene made it by no means easy to let loose. Besides, their hopes of victory lay principality in the hoplites on the deck, who stood and fought in order. The ship remained stationary. Who fought in order, the ship had to remain stationary. The maneuver of passing through the lines was not tried. In short, strength and pluck had more share in the fight than science. In other words, it was not about maneuver and strategy. It was more about the standing there and the fighting it out with the hoplites on the deck. Okay, everywhere atonement reigned. Uh, uh, in the battle being line 4 of the 40 48. This is a seven line thing, so it's pretty interesting. Battle reigned, the battle being one scene of confusion. Meanwhile, the Athenian triumphs, by coming up to the Croatians whenever they were pressed, served to alarm the enemy, though the commander could not join in the battle from fear of their instructions. The right wing of the Corinthians suffered most. The Corinthians routed it and chased the Croatians, chased them in order to the continent with 20 ships, sailed up to their camp and burnt the tents, which they found empty, and plundered the equipment, the supplies and things. So in this quarter, the Corinthians and the allies were defeated, and the Croatians were victorious. But where the Corinthians themselves were, on the left, they gained a decisive success. Their scanty forces of Croatians being further weakened by the want of 22 means absence in the pursuit. Seeing the Croatians hard pressed, the Athenians began at length to assist them more unequivocally. At first, it was true they refrained from charging any ship, but when the rout was becoming obvious and the Corinthians were pressing on, at the time at last came when everyone set to, and all distinction was laid aside. And it came to this point that the Corinthians and the Athenians raised their hands against one another. So therefore, what is he saying? That the Athenians were the Athenian commander was just there. They would kind of move their ships to kind of intimidate them, but they weren't fighting anything. And what happened was, even though the Croatians win on the right side, the left side of their thing, in other words, the left flank, the Corinthians won. The Croatians won one sense on the one side, on the what is on the Corinthians routed it on the right wing, the right wings of the Corinthians. So the Corinthian right collapsed, but the left had success, and in fact, they really had decisive success on forcing back and defeating the Croatians, and they were disordered, and they were, and it's at this point where it looked like a rout. The Athenians said, "Well, we got to help the Croatians out," and that's when they start. It is at this point the Athenian leader and the Athenians go to help. The 20 ships will go help, and again, they were 20 ships less. I mean, that was one of the reasons why the thing kind of collapsed. The lack of the Athenians there, but the Athenians were kind of playing a game of just trying to scare off this, and may have. That's why it was the question of what's going on here. So this leads us now to 50. After the rout, the Corinthians, instead of employing themselves in lashing fast and hurling after the hulls of the trimenes which they had disabled, turned their attention to the men who they butchered as they sailed through, not caring so much to make prisoners. Some even of their own friends were slain by them by mistake in ignorance of the defeat of the right wing. In other words, okay, what happened was as the ships were retreating, um, 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 they instead of destroying the ships, they started attacking the men, retreating men. And what they were, and as they were killing the retreating men, they also were killing some of their own retreating men who were collapsed because they didn't know about the collapse of the right wing. Okay, um, so number two, for the number of the trimenes on both sides and the distance to which they covered the sea, it made difficult after they had once joined to distinguish between conquering and conquered. This battle proved far greater than any before it, at least between the Hellenes and the number of vessels engaged. After the Corinthians had chased the Coriatians to the land, they turned to the wrecks and their dead, most of whom they succeeded in getting hold of and conveying to Sabota, in the rendezvous of the land forces furnished by the barbarian allies. Sabota, it must be known, is a desert harbor of Theoprotus. This task over, they mustered anew and sailed against the Coriatians, whom, on their part, advanced to meet them with all their ships that were fit for service and remained to and remaining to them, accompanied by the Athenian vessels, fearing they might attempt a landing in their territory. It was by this time getting late, and the praeon had been sung for the attack when the Corinthians suddenly began to back water. In other words, something was said to be sung for the attack. A prayer of him was done. They back water. They had observed 20 Athenian ships sailing up, which had been sent out afterwards to reinforce the 10 Trimenes by the Athenians, who feared, as it turned out justly, the defeat of the Coriatians and the inability of the handful of ships to protect them. So, in other words, 10 more ships come. In other words, another 20 more ships started sailing up. Because the original 10 ships, who kind of were there like this, who decided to go help, they said, oh, maybe they're not enough. We better send some more because they're probably going to lose against the Corinthians, right? These ships were thus seen by the Corinthians first. They suspected that they were from Athens, and that those which they saw were not all, but that they were more behind, which according to so when they saw the 20 ships come, they thought, oh my God, the Athenians are sending more ships. There's more than 20. Oh my God! So we're gonna be fighting here. So we better retreat. In other words, um, um, this is line two, starting line two. The Corinthians, meanwhile, had not sighted them, and they were advancing from a point which they could not see well, and were wondering why the Corinthians were backing water. When some caught sight of them and cried out that the ships uh, 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 in, there were ships in sight ahead. Upon this, they also retired, for it was now getting dark, and the retreat from the Corinthians had suspended hostilities. Thus they parted from each other. The battle ceased with night. The Corinthians were in the camp of Leucrima, with these 20 trimenes from Athens under the command of Glaucon, son of Ligus, Aristicon, son of Leogora, bore on through the corpses and the wrecks, and sailed to the camp not long after they were sighted. It was now night, and the Coriatians feared they might be hostile vessels, but they soon recognized them when the ships came to anchor. Okay. Now the next day, 51. In other words, the Trimeans come to this is where I think there's a text issue of these two things. I think this is where 51. So that was both 50 and 51, 50 and 51 together. Starting here, the ships at Coration first. This second. This is the chapter 51. Okay, now why am I? Now, 52, the next day, 30 Athenian vessels put out to sea, accompanied by all the Corinthian ships that were seaworthy, and sailed into the harbors Sybota, where the Corinthians lay, to see if they would engage. The Corinthians put out from land and formed a line in the open sea, but beyond this made no further movement, having no intention of assuming offense. For they saw reinforcements arrived fresh from Athens, and themselves confronted by numerous difficulties, such as necessity of guarding the prisoners whom they had on board, and wanting all means of refitting the ships in of a desert place. They couldn't fix their ships. They were in a desert island. The harbor was a desert, not a really thing like this. What they were thinking more was on how their voyage was to be affected. They feared that the Athenians might consider the treaty was resolved by fighting which had occurred and forfeited their departure. 53 now. This is chapter 53. Accordingly, they resolved to put some men on board boats and send them without a herald's wand to the Athenians, an experiment. Having done so, they spoke the following: "You do wrong, Athenians, to begin war and break the treaty. Engaged in chasing our enemies, we find you placing yourselves in the path of arms against us. Now, if your intentions are to prevent us from sailing to Croatia or anywhere else that we may wish, and if you are for breaking the treaty, first take us that are here and treat us as enemies." Such was what they said, and the Corinthians' armaments were within a hearing. The Corinthians' armaments were within a hearing, and immediately called out to take them and kill them. But the Athenians answered as follows: "Neither we are beginning wars, Peloponnesians, nor are we breaking the treaty. But these Croatians are our allies, and we've come to help them. So if you want to sail anywhere, we place no obstacle in your way. But if you're going to sail against Croatia or any of her possessions, we shall do our best to stop you." So that's 53. Now 54. Receiving the answer from the Athenians, the Croatians commenced preparations for their voyage home and set up a trophy in Sobida on mainland, while the Croatians took up their wrecks and dead that had been carried out by them by the current, and a wind which rose at night, scattering them in all directions, and set up their trophy on Sitava and on the islands as victors. The reason each side had for claiming the victory were these: the Corinthians had been victorious in the sea fight until night, and having thus been enabled to carry off most of the wrecks and the dead, they were in possession of no fewer than 1,000 prisoners of war and destroyed nearly 70 vessels. The Croatians destroyed about 30 ships, and after the arrival of the Athenians had taken up the wrecks and the deads on their side, they had begun to see the Corinthians retire before them, backing water in sight of the Athenian vessel. And upon arrival, Athenians refused to sail out against them from Sabeda. In other words, both sides thought it was victory. It was not decisive. It wasn't, even though they won the sea battle against the Croatians, they kind of didn't finish the job. Even though they destroyed more, they did destroy a lot. And both sides, the Croatians suffered more than the Corinthians in the battle. But the fact that at the end of the day, with the side of the Athens, the Athenians scared off the Carthaginians, not Carthaginians, sorry, Corinthians, not Carthaginians, Rome. So now at 55. The Corinthians on their voyage home took Anacortum, which stands at the mouth of the Abrasian Gulf. The place was taken by treachery, by being common ground to the Croatians and the Corinthians. After established Corinthian settlers there, they retired home. 800 of the Corinthians were slaves. 800 of the Croatians were slaves. These they sold. 250 they retained in captivity and treated with great attention, in hope that they might bring over their country to Corinth on their return. Most of them being, as it happened, men of high position in Croatia. They took, the people, the ones who survived, they high position, treated them very well, nice, and they go back. Maybe they'll be okay. They created fifth column agents inside Croatia. They took the wealthy, the very men of very high position in Croatia. In other words, they gave them attention. They gave them treatment. In this way, Croatia maintained her political existence in the war with Corinth, and Athenian vessels left the island. This was the first cause of the war that Corinth had against Athens, namely that they had fought against them with the Croatians in time of treaty. Almost immediately after this, fresh differences arose between Athens and the Peloponnesians, which contributed to the share of the war. So that, therefore, he gives the first one of the Corinthian and Carthaginian, not Carthaginian, Corinthian and Croatian dispute. Cor- Cor- Corinth was part of the Peloponnesian League, with Sparta leading, and Croatia was neutral outside of it, and they came and because of this, they came, as we talked earlier, they came to get Spartans' help. Croatia said, "Don't you do that?" But then they do it, as we saw in this battle, and happens is that they don't help basically defeat the Croatians, but they prevent a complete victory. Okay, and the battle is indecisive because even though the Corinthians do much better, the Athenians didn't fight. The Athenians only come to fight at a point when, after the Croatians have lost the sea on the left flank, decisively lost, and because of this, what they they do what? They come to the defense of that, and the Croatians back water. They retreat when they see the ships coming and new ships coming. So therefore, this is what, in a sense, that it's the retreating of the thing. And then when the next day, when they go to confront them at we said at Sabota, right? It's a desert place. They couldn't. It was in other words, it was the place where they were. They didn't have enough. Didn't have. It was a kind of a desert harbor. It doesn't have a lot of resources. It couldn't fix. The Corinthians couldn't fix their ships and do this, and they were fearing that the Athenians had even more forces coming, and that therefore they just opted to kind of, okay, we're gonna stop here, uh, and then go like this. This is why, and they again. Then what happened was at 55, we say that therefore they did a trick. The Corinthians left, but then a place that's supposed to be neutral to both the Corinthians and they seized it and put it, and they sold their prisoners as slaves, except for what is it about, as it said, they kept about 250 remain in captivity, and these mostly about uh, uh, they treated with great attention these people, about 250 they kept remain in captivity. They treated with great attention because these 250 were probably, it should, the elites, the children of the elite, sons of the important families in there, and that they were going to use them and try to treat them well. So if they come back to Corinthia, they will say, "Oh no, they'll turn Corinth to not to Corinth, back to Corinth, Croatia, back to Corinth." And this is why they do it. So therefore, in other words, now the next thing is that a new dispute happened. Corinth was forming a scheme of retaliation, and the Athens suspected her hostility. The Patricians who inhabit the isthmus of Pellene, being a Corinthian colony, but tributary allies of Athens, were ordered to raise the wall on Pelles' side of the city, to give hostages, and to dismiss the Corinthian magistrates, and in future not receive any person sent from Corinth annually to succeed them. In other words, basically Athens said to this ally, knock your wall down, remove your wall, uh, kick out your leaders, put someone that's more our ally than their ally, and next time they send someone to replace them, don't accept them. And actually, the city had to give hostages. We're going to take hostages, particularly those in the root parts of, this is a very concept of the ancient world, hostages. In other words, you kept things by sending people over there, and they were hostages. So if you broke your agreement, they killed you. So therefore, that's how they did it. Typically the weaker gave the weaker power had to give the hostages. Um, it was feared that they might persuade by Picadius and the Corinthians to revolt, um, uh, 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 and and might draw the rest of the allies in the area of Thrace to revolt with them. So they were feared that the Corinthian leadership will this allied state would be kind of, because it was a colony of Corinth, um, and we're kind of still connected to it. And it said it was what is it? A colony, but a tributary to Athens. They were afraid that the Corinths would encourage them to revolt, and that revolt would bring the other allies in the Thrace area of Thrace to revolt with them. That's problematic. Okay, let's move our picture. 57, paragraph chapter 7. These precautions against Parthenia were taken by the Athenians immediately after the Battle of Croatia. Not only was Corinth at length openly hostile, but Perdiccas, son of Alexander, king of the Macedonians. There's two. This is not Alexander the Great. This is uh, uh, the earlier Alexander, and had from an old friend and ally been made an enemy. He had been made an enemy by Athenians entering into alliance with Philip, his brother, and Darius, who were allied in opposition to him. So Philip was the brother. Athens kind of allied with Philip. In his alarm that he had sent to Sparta to try to involve the Athenians in a war with Peloponnese, and was endeavoring to win over Corinth in order to bring about the revolt of Potea. Because in other words, he was hoping that these revolts on Trace would allow him to kind of get control and get punished the Athenians. The Athenians were helping his a brother of his, Philip, as his brother, yeah, it's against him, against the brother, against brother. See, the Macedonians are more tribal and less developed. They don't have political rule. They have a kingly rule. They're ruled by clan or line. And that there was a contestation between Philip and Alexander about who should be king in that sense. And therefore, Athens kind of supported Philip against Alexander, and that pissed Alexander off. Again, this is not Alexander the Great. This is the other Alexander. This is the earlier Alexander. And he also made overtures to the Cadilians in Thrace and to the Boeotians to persuade them to join the revolt. For he thought that if these places on the border he could make allies, it would be easier to carry on the war with their cooperation. Alive to all of this and wishing to anticipate the revolt of the cities, the Athenians acted as followed. They were just then sending off 30 ships and 1,000 hoplites to the Perdician territories under the command of Arch Estreus, son of Lycomenes, with 4 colleagues. They instructed those in command of the ships to take hostages from the Perdicians, to raise the wall, and to be on guard against the revolt of the neighboring cities. Now, 58. Meanwhile, Potidanos sent envoys to Athens on chance of persuading them to take no new steps in regard to them. They also went to Corinth with the Carthaginians to secure support in case of need. Failing after prolonged negotiation to attain anything satisfactory from the Athenians, being unable for all they could say to prevent the vessels that were destined for Macedonia from also sailing against them, received from the Spartan authority a promise to invade Attica if the Athenians should attack Podia, and the Podians still thus favored by the moment, at last entered a league with the Chaldeans and Bottians and revolted. So a revolt. So therefore, these little states, egged on by the Macedonians, revolted, and they went, led by the Podian. They went to Sparta, and Spartan said, "Oh, we'll help you." Okay, and okay, no, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's go back for a second. Yeah, this is the continuation of that thing. And Podeus induced the Classidians to abandon and demolish their cities on the seaboard, and settling inland at Oinenos, Thos, to make the one city a stronger place. Meanwhile, to those who followed his advice, he gave part of the territory of Metadona around Lake Boibe as a place of abode while the war against the Athenians would last. They accordingly demolished their cities and moved inland to prepare for war. So um, they induced those people to abandon their cities. It's moving in and up there, safer, stronger location, and they would make a stronger city up there, and they would be safe from the Athenians. Fort 59, 30 ships from the Athenians arriving at the Trace area found Padea and the rest in revolt. Their commanders, considering it quite impossible with their present force to carry on war with the Perfidias and with the Confederate cities as well, turned to Macedonia, their original destination, and having established themselves there, carried a war in cooperation with Philip, the brother of Derdas, who had invaded the country from the interior. Meanwhile, this is next 60. Meanwhile, the Corinthians, with Potia in revolt, and the Athenian ships on the coast of Macedonia, alarmed for the safety of the place, thinking it was in its danger there, sent volunteers from Corinth and mercenaries from the rest of the Peloponnese to number 1,600 hoplites in all, and 400 light troops. Aristus, son of Edemanus, who was already a steady friend to the Potidans, took command of the expedition, and it was principally for the love of him that most of the men of Corinth volunteered. So the reason why the men volunteered was because of this guy, Aristos of Enuris, who went there because he was in love, it was his friend. Did it for personal reason that he loved, was a friend of Potamos, who was leading the thing, and took command of the expedition. And these people came because of him. They arrived in Thrace 40 days after the revolt of the Athenians also immediately received news of the revolts in the cities. On being informed that Aristos and his reinforcements were on their way, they sent 2,000 hoplites of their own citizens and 40 ships against the place in revolt, under the command of Callias, son of Calides, and 4 colleagues. They arrived in Macedonia first and found that the force of the 10,000, a force of 1,000 men that had been first sent out just became masters of Themis and besieging Crina. They also joined in the investment and besieged Pridia for a while. Subsequently, they came up to terms and concluded and forced an alliance with the Picadians, Hastings by the call of Podacia, and the arrival of Aristus at that place. In other words, these things came in. I was like, oh, we're seeing too much. They withdrew from Macedonia, going to Berea and thence to Strepa. And after a futile attempt on the latter place, they pursued by land their march to Podia with 3,000 hoplites of their own citizens, besides a number of their allies, and 600 Macedonian horsemen, the followers of Philip and Panosius. With these sailed 70 ships along the coast. Advancing by short marches, on the third day they arrived at Gilcus, where they encamped. Now 62. Meanwhile, the Podacians and the Peloponnese with Aristus were encamped on Olynthian side of the city on the isthmus. An expedition of the Athenians and had established a market outside the city. The allies had chosen Aristus general of all the infantry, and while the command of the cavalry had given to Perfidias, who had now left the alliance of the Athenians, gone back to that of the Podacians, having disputed Ilonian as his general. The plan of Aristus was to keep his own force on the isthmus and wait to attack the Athenians, leaving the Chaldidians and the allies outside the isthmus. And the 200 cavalry from Picadudus and Olynthus to act upon the Athenian rear on the occasion of their advancing against him, and thus to place the enemy between two fires. While Callias, the Athenian general, and his colleague dispatched the Macedonian horse and a few of the allies to Corinth to prevent any movement being made from that quarter. The Athenians themselves broke up the camp and marched against Padea. They had arrived at the isthmus and saw the enemy preparing for battle, and they formed against him, and soon afterwards engaged. The wing of Artus with the Corinthians and the others picked troops round him, routed the wing opposed to it, and followed for considerable distance in pursuit. The rest of the day, the army of the Potentians and the Peloponnesians was defeated by the Athenians and took refuge in the fortifications. So what happened was that the Athenians basically defeated the armies of the Peloponnese and they defeated them to the degree that they routed them to not routed but the movement the fortifications. They retreated from their outside positions. They ran behind the fortifications. Now chapter 63. Returning from the pursuit, Aristus perceived the defeat of the rest of the army. Being at the loss, which which of the two risks to choose, whether to go to Olymp or to Padea, he at last determined to draw his men into a small space as possible and force his way along with a run into Padea. Not without difficulty, through a storm of missiles, he passed along the breakwater to the sea and brought off almost all of his men saved, though few were lost. In other words, they tried to get out like this. Meanwhile, the auxiliaries of the Potentians from Olynthus, which was about 7 miles off, in the sight of Padida, when the battle began and the signal was raised, advanced a little way to render assistance, and the Macedonian horse formed against them to prevent it. But on victory speedily declared for the Athenians, the signal was being taken down. They retired before the walls, and the Macedonians returned to the Athenians. Thus, there were no cavalry presence on either side. After the battle, the Athenians took up the trophy and gave back the dead to the Potentians under truce. The Potentians and their allies had close upon 300 killed. The Athenians 150 of their own citizens, and Callias, their general, I think died as well. 64. On the wall on the side of the isthmus now had work at once raised against it and manned by the Athenians. On that side of the Pellene, no works raised against it. They did not think themselves strong enough at once to keep a garrison on the isthmus and to cross over to Peloponnese and raise works there. They were afraid that the Potentians and their allies might take advantage of the division to attack them. Meanwhile, the Athenians at home, learning there were no works at Pellene, sometimes afterwards sent off 1,600 hoplites of their own citizens under command of Promio, son of Aspolius, Aspoius, arrived at Pellene. He fixed his headquarters at Aristis, and he led his army against Padea and by short marches, ravaging the country as he advanced. No one venturing to meet him in the field, he raised works against the walls on the side of Pellene. So the length of Padea was strongly invested on either side, from the sea by the ships cooperating in the blockade. So the ships, they raised on one side. The new bunch of Athenians came, 1,600 came again. They crossed the island land, go on the other side, and they did it, and they put the walls there, and the ships blockading it. Okay, so they got the city sieged. Orissus, seeing the investment complete and having no hope of its salvation except in event of some movement from the Peloponnese or some other improbable contingency, advised all except 500 to watch for the wind and sail out of the place in order that their provisions might longer last. He was willing to be himself one of those whom remained, unable to persuade them, desirous for acting on the next alternative, and of having things outside of the best possible. He eluded the guard ships. He eluded the guard ships of the Athenians and sailed out. Remaining among the Chaldeans, he continued to carry on the war, and particularly he set up an ambush near the city of Selmithian and cut off many of them. He also communicated with the Peloponnesus, the region of that, and tried to contrive some methods by which help might be brought. Meanwhile, after the completion of the investment of Padilla, Fromino next employed his 1,600 men in ravaging Clanes and Bodia. Some of the cities were also taken by him. So, they went and punished the cities who were involved in the rebellion. The Athenians and the Peloponnese had these antecedent grounds of complaints against each other. And the complaints of Corinth was that her colony, Padilla, and the Corinthians had, and Peloponnesian cities within it, were being besieged, and that the Athenians against the Peloponnese was they incited one of the cities in their alliance and liable for tribute to revolt, and that they had come and openly fighting against her on the side of the Paudicians. All of this, war had not yet broken out, and the two sides, there was still truce for a while. This was a private affair on the part of Corinth. This is still truce. This is a private affair on the Corinth. The Corinthian, in other words, Corinthian citizens on their own did this. Corinth itself wasn't, therefore, the whole league wasn't involved. The league wasn't involved, in other words. Now, 67, chapter 67. But the siege of Podeus put the end to her inaction. She had men inside it. Besides, she favored the place. Immediately summoning the allies of the Sparta, she came and loudly accused Athens of breaching the treaty and aggression on the rights of the Peloponnese. With her, the Egentinians, formerly unrepresented from fear of Athens, in secret proved not the least urgent for the advocates for war, asserting that they had not the independence guaranteed to them by the treaty. After extending the summons to any of their allies and others who might have complaints to make against the Athenian aggression, the Spartans held their ordinary assembly and invited them to speak. They were many who came forward and made their several accusations, among them the Megaeans, a list of grievances called special attention to the fact that their exclusion from the ports of the Athenian Empire and the market of Athens in defiance of the treaty. The last of all, the Corinthians came forward, having let those who preceded them inflame the Spartans. Now, followed with a speech to this effect. Now, this is going to be Spartan, the confidence which you feel in your constitution and your regime, Politeia, and your social order inclines you to receive any reflections of ours on the power with a certain skepticism. Hence springs your moderation. Hence also rather limited information which you betray in dealing with foreign politics, because there's foreign affairs. You do it, and also there's another reason. Sparta has its own problems with its maintaining its control over the Helots or the Milesians, and therefore, if these people revolt, that'd be very bad for Sparta. They know that, so that's what that Spartan caution is manyfold. It's a land power, not a sea power. It doesn't really it's kind of very conservative. So the Corinthians are trying to bold them, embarrass them into going doing this, right? Um, Time after time, it was our voice raised to warn off the blows, warn you of the blows about to be dealt us by Athens. And time after time, instead of taking the trouble to discern the worth of our warnings, you contented yourself with suspecting the speaker to be inspired by private interest. And so, instead of calling these allies together before the blow fell, you have delayed to do so till we are smarting under it. And the allies, and of the allies, it is not unfitting that we make this speech, for we have every great, very great complaints uh, uh, of high-handed treatment by the Athenians and neglect by you. So I'm angry because Athenians treated us badly and done things to us and harmed our interest, and you, who should have helped us, didn't do anything. Okay. Now, if these assaults on the right of Hellenes had been made in the dark, you might be unrequited with the facts, on, and it would be our duty to enlighten you. As it is, long speeches are not needed, where you see servitude accomplished for some of us, meditated for others, in particular of our allies, and prolonged preparations by the aggressors for the hours of war. Or what, pray, is the meaning of their reception of Croatia by fraud and holding it against us by force? What of the siege at Podetia? Places one which lies most conveniently for any action against the Thracian cities, while the others would have contributed a very large navy to the Peloponnesians. Now 69. Um, for all of this, you are responsible. And it was it it was who first allowed them to fortify their city after the Persian War, and afterwards to elect the wrong wall. You, who then and now are always depriving of freedom not only those whom they have enslaved, but also those whom they have yet been your allies. For the true author of the subjugation of the people is not so much the immediate agent as the power which permits it from having the means to prevent it. Particularly that if the power aspires to the glory of being the liberator of the Hellenes, we are at last assembled. In other words, they're flattering, a little bit flattering. They're also not flattering. They're critics. They're flattering. They're saying that you're the great liberator. You're going to be not. It's kind of like mocking, a little bit of mocking. It's kind of like saying, yes, you've allowed this to happen. You let Athens grow great. You're not doing anything. You could have stopped them any time. You're supposed to be the great liberator of the Greeks, but you've let this happen. Okay, this is their mocking. It's not necessary. It's yeah, they're causing the trouble, but you let it happen. You could have stopped it. Okay. Um, it has not been easy to assemble, nor even now are the objects defined. We ought not to be still inquiring into the facts of our wrongs, but into the means of our defense. So we shouldn't be doing about what we've done wrong. We should be thinking about our defense. Okay? For the aggressors with matured plans to oppose to our indecisions have cast threats aside and betaken themselves to action. In other words, the Athenians aren't carried with our threats or our things; they're acting already. Okay, and we know what are the plans by which Athenian aggression travels, and how insidious it was of progress. A degree of confidence she may feel from the idea is that your bluntness of perception prevents your noticing her, but it is not. But it is nothing to the impulse which her advance will receive from the knowledge that you see, but you do not care to interfere. You Spartans of all the Hellenes are alone inactive, and defend yourself not by doing anything, but by looking as you would to do something. You alone wait until the power of the enemy is becoming thrice its original size, twice its original size, instead of crushing it in infancy. And yet the world used to say that you were to be depended upon. But in your case, we fear it was said more. It was it said more than the truth. In other words, it's not you can't be depended upon. You can't. In other words, he's basing everyone dependent because we thought you could be depended upon. But no, that was not true. You can't be depended upon. Look how they're acting. You're sitting here not doing anything yet. The Medes, we ourselves know, had time to come from the end of the earth to the Peloponnese, without any force of yours worthy of the name advancing to meet them. But this was a distant enemy. Well, Athens, at all events, is a near neighbor, and yet Athens you utterly disregard. Against Athens, you prefer to act on defensive instead of on the offensive, and you make it an affair of chance by deferring the struggle till she has grown far stronger than at first. And yet you know that on the whole, the rock on which the barbarians had wrecked himself on, that is our present. That if our present enemy Athens had not again and again annihilated us, we owe it more to her blunders than to your protection. In other words, Athens blunders, mistake. Anything that we've had so far, the fights, we're surviving and we're here now, not because of it's due to Athens and her blunders than to Sparta's help. He's saying. Indeed, expectation from you have before now been the ruin of some, and whose faith induced them to omit preparation. In other words, we have not. Some of us have not. Some people did not do preparations because they were relying upon your promises to come, and you did nothing, and because of that they were ruined. We hope that none of you will consider these words of remonstrance to be rather words of hostility. Men remonstrate with friends who are in error. Accusations they reserve for enemies who have wronged. They're saying these are not accusations against you. Okay, these are remonstrations. So don't get angry at our remonstrations against you, because we're your friends and we're trying to correct you. Okay, accusations are what enemies make of you. This is 70. Besides, we consider that we have good right as anyone to point out the neighbor's fault, particularly when we contemplate the great contrast between the two characters of the cities, these two cities' characters. A contrast at which, as far as we can see, you have little perception, having never yet considered what sort of antagonies you will encounter in the Athenians, how widely, how absolutely different from yourselves. The Athenians are addicted to innovation. They are designed by characterized by swiftness alike in conception and execution. You have a genius for keeping what you have got, accompanied by a total want of invention. And when forced to act, you never go far enough. Again, they are adventurous beyond their power and daring beyond their judgment. And in danger, they are sanguine. Uh, 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 um, your want is to attempt less than is justified by your power, to mistrust even what is sanctioned by your judgment, and to fancy that danger. Okay, let me go here for a second. And fancy that from danger there is no release. In other words, there's no release. Further, there is a promptitude on their side against procrastination. there's promptness on their side. Now, they have timeliness. They do it. You procrastinate and yours. They are never at home. You are most disinclined to leave your home. For they hope by their absence to extend their acquisitions. You fear by your advance to endanger what you have left behind. They are swift to follow up success and slow to recoil from reverse. Their bodies they spend ungrudgingly. Their bodies they spend ungrudgingly in their country's cause. Their intellect they jealously husband to be employed in their service. The scheme unexecuted is with them a positive loss. A successful enterprise is a comparative failure. A successful enterprise is a comparative failure. The deficiency caused by the miscarriage of an undertaking is soon filled up by the fresh hopes, and they alone are enabled, for they alone are enabled to call a thing hoped for a thing got, by the speed with which they act upon their resolutions. Thus they toil on in trouble and danger in all days of their lives, with little opportunity for enjoying, ever being engaged in getting. Their only idea of a holiday is to do what the occasion demands, and to them, laborious occupation is less a misfortune than the peace of a quiet life. To describe their character in a word, one might truly say that they were born into the world to take no rest themselves and to give none to others. That's a great line. In other words, Athenians are those to work on the work ethic, the Athenian work ethic, right? They always want more, 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 more. Okay, the Spartans are kind of okay. We're going to keep it. So the Spartans are this conservative, not willing to risk. They're risk averse. Where Athens is risk takers. Okay, the Athenians are but they work hard. Risk takers, hard workers, and diligent too. They say. Such as Athens, now this is the next line, this is A71, such as Athens, your antagonist. And yet the Spartans, you still delay and fail to see that peace stays longest with those who are not more careful to use their power justly than to show such determination not to submit to injustice. But on the contrary, your ideal of fair dealings is based on the principle that if you do not injure others, you need not risk your own fortunes in preventing others from injuring you. How could you? How now you could scarcely have succeeded in such a policy, even with its neighbor, even with a neighbor like yourself. But in the present instance, as we have just shown, your habits are old-fashioned as compared to theirs. It is the law as in the arts as it is it is the law as in the arts, so in politics, that improvements ever prevail, and through fixed usages may be best in undisturbed communities. Constant necessity of action must be accompanied by the constant improvement of methods. In other words, progress. In other words, the Athenians always do. You don't. You can continuity versus progress. And if it was stable, everything was stable. Your conservatism would be fine. But in the situation of this progress and this constant growth and constant activity, it's not. Thus, it happens that the very vast experience of Athens has carried her further than you on the path of innovation. Here, at least, let your procrastination end. For the present, assist your allies in Perdacia, in particular, as you promised, with a speedy invasion of Attica, and do not sacrifice friends, the kindred, to their bitterest enemies, and drive the rest of us in despair to some other alliance. Such a step would not be condemned either by the gods who received our oaths or by the men who witnessed them. In other words, keep your word, do you do not. The blame for a breach of the treaty cannot be laid on the people whom desertion compels to seek new relations, but on the powers that fail to assist the Confederate. In other words, don't, in other words, don't blame the people doing that. It's the power who fails to help the Confederate. Okay, that's interesting. This is because maybe that would have been the thing. Croatia, if Corinth helped Croatia, then instead of the breakaway colony did so out of spite, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But they didn't do that. They forced the Croatians to go to Sparta. I mean, Sparta, go to Athens. Um, okay, um, but if only you will act, we will stand by you. And it would be unnatural for us to change, and never should we meet with such a congenial ally. In other words, if you decide to act, we'll stay with you. We're not going to change our position. Uh, for these reasons, choose the right course and endeavor us not let the Peloponnese under your supremacy degenerate from the prestige it once enjoyed under your ancestors. If you don't help us now, we're going to be forced to go to other people. In other words, we can't rely on you. But if you come now, keep your word, keep your tendency, help now, act, right? Such as, let me take some water. My stomach's going. Such the words of the Corinthians. They have now, and there happened to be Athenian envoys present at the Sparta on better business. On hearing the speeches, they thought themselves called upon to come before the Spartans. Their intention was not to offer a defense on any of the charges which which the cities had brought against them, but to show on the comprehensive view that it was not a matter to be hastily decided on, but one that demanded further consideration. There was also a wish to call attention to the great power of Athens, and to refresh the memory of the old, and enlighten the ignorance of the young, from a notion that their words might have this effect on inducing them to prefer tranquility to war. So they came to the Spartans and said that they, too, if they were no objections, wished to speak to the assembly. They replied by inviting them to come forward, and the Athenians advanced, and they spoke as follows. The object of our mission here was not to argue with your allies, but to attend matters on which our city dispatched us. However, the vehemence of the outcry that we have heard against us had prevailed on us to come forward. It is not to combat the accusations of the cities. Indeed, you are not judges before whom either of us or they could plead, but to prevent your taking the wrong course on matters of great importance by yielding too readily to the persuasion of your allies. We also wish to show on a review of the whole incident that we have fair title to our possessions, and that our country has claims to consideration. We need not refer to remote antiquity. There we could appeal to the voices of tradition, but not to the experience of our audience. But to the Persian wars and the contemporary history we must refer, although we are rather tired of continually bringing this subject forward. In our action during that war, we ran a great risk to obtain certain advantages. You had your share in the solid result, but do not try to rob us of all the share in that good that the glory may do. However, the story shall be told not of much to seek to be spared hostility, as to testify against it, and to show as if you are too ill advised to enter into a struggle with Athens. For what sort of antagonist you're likely to prove? We assert that at Marathon we were at the forefront of danger and faced the barbarians by ourselves. that when he came the second time, unable to cope with him by land, we went aboard our ships with our people and joined in the action at Salamis. This prevented him from taking the Peloponnesian city by city and ravaging them with his fleets. When the multitude of his vessels would have made any combination of self defense improbable. The best proof of this was furnished by the invaders himself. Defeated by sea, he considered his power no longer to be what it was. He retired speedily as possible with the greatest part of his army. So once we defeated him at Salamis, see, we didn't defeat him. If we left and we just left and didn't fight him at Salamis and defeat him, his navy, his army would have just taken city by city by city of the Peloponnese, and there would have been no defense against them. So it was us who defeated them at Salamis, not you. We saved your ass. Because we could have just took our ships and left. We took our city on our ships, and we could have just left and formed a new city someplace and left you to be under the Persian king. But we fought and we defeated at Salamis, and we saved your ass, basically. Okay, this is as such, then, it was the result of the matter that was clearly proved that it was the fleet of the Hellenists that had caused that her cause depended. Well, to this result, we contribute three very useful elements, namely the largest number of ships, the ablest commanders, and the most unhesitating patriotism, in other words, zealousness, the zealousness of the Athenians. Our contingents of the ships was little less than 2/3 of the whole 400, and the commander was Themistocles, whom chiefly it was through whom chiefly it was that the battle took place in the straits, the acknowledged salvation of our cause. Indeed, it was the reason for your receiving him with honors as such as had never been according to any foreign visitors, while the daring patriotism or the daring zealotry or care, we had no competitors. Receiving no reinforcements from behind, seeing everything in front as we of us already subjugated. We had the spirit, never abandoning our city after sacrificing our property, and indeed deserting the remainder of the league or depriving them of our service by dispersing, to throw ourselves in our ships and meet the danger without thought of resenting your having neglected to assist us. We assert, therefore, we conferred on you quite as much as we received. We conferred unto you much as much we received. For you had a stake to fight for. The city which you had left were still filled with your homes, and you had the prospects of enjoying them again. And your coming was prompted quite as much by fear of yourself for yourselves as for us. It was at all events, you never appeared till we had nothing left to lose. But we left behind us a city that was a city no longer, and staked our lives for a city that had an existence only in a desperate hope, and bore our full share in your deliverance and in ours. But if we had copied others, allowed fears for our territory to make us go over to the Medes before you came, or if we allowed our ruin to break our spirit and prevented us from embarking the ships, your naval inferiority would have made the sea fight unnecessary, and his objects would have become peacefully obtained. Sure, 75. Surely, Spartans, neither by the zealotry we have employed, as patriotism, zealotry, or the enthusiasm we employed at this crisis, nor the wisdom of our consul, do we merit our extreme unpopularity with the Hellenists, not at least unpopularity with our empire, in other words, the Athenian reign, our league, our thing. That empire we acquired not by violence, but because you were unwilling to prosecute to the conclusion of the war against the barbarians, and because the allies attached themselves to us and spontaneously asked us to assume the command. And the nature of the cause first compelled us to advance our empire to its present height. Fear, the alliance, the league. Is empire is the wrong word there, and I think this is why maybe it's misleading. Fear of principal motive, though honor and interest afterwards came in. In other words, fear. We would want, the fear of the Persian, fear of the other. That we did this great thing. Then interest and honor and interest afterwards came in. At least when almost all hated us, when some had already revolted and had been subdued, when you had ceased to be the friends that you once were, and had become objects of suspicion and dislike, it no longer appeared safe to give up our empire, our alliances. In other words, we did this originally for them to keep the control, prevent the Persian. Then what happened was we had to deal with some problems of this. We had some people revolt. We had some allies and some things. We got to change their mind and revolt. We had to keep that controlled. We had this great power, and then what happened was you ceased being a friend, and you became suspicious of us and this, and therefore we couldn't risk. Once that happened, we couldn't risk reducing the empire, right? So now, next 76. You, at all events, Spartans, have used your supremacy to settle all the states or the cities in the Peloponnese as it is agreeable to you. And if at the period of which you are speaking you had preserved to the matter the end of the matter, and had incurred hatred in your command, we are sure that you would have made yourself just as galling to the allies, and would have been forced to choose between a strong government and danger to yourselves. It follows that it is not a very remarkable action, on contrary to the common practice of mankind, that if we did accept the league or the empire, it says, but league, or this rule of this thing, alliance, that was offered to us, and refused to give it up under pressure of the three of the strongest motives: fear, honor, and interest. And it was not we who set the example, but it was always been the law that the weaker should be subject to the stronger. Besides, we believed ourselves to be worthy of our possession, and so you thought us until now, when calculations of interest having been made has made you take up the cry of justice, a consideration which no one ever yet brought forward to hinder his ambitions when he had a chance of gaining through might. In other words, the general rule of the politics is the rule of the weaker should obey the stronger. This is the idea. This is the politics. This is what everyone's doing this. And you've agreed to this. Now you're talking about justice? Justice is never, you're taking this concern about the rightness and justice of the matter. Before, we've always looked at the other question. Um, and praise is due to all who, if not so superior to human nature as to refuse dominion, will respect justice more than their position compels them to. All great praise to any human being who picks, who has power, will pick justice over their interest. Okay, um, we imagine that our moderation would be best demonstrated by the conduct of who should be placed in our position. But even our equality has very unreasonably subjected us to condemnation rather than approval. Okay, so therefore now we go we go to 77. Our abrogation of our rights in this contract, uh, in the contract trials with our allies, and are causing them to be decided by impartial laws at Athens, have gained us the character of being litigious. None care to inquire why this approach is not brought against other imperial powers, other allying powers, who treat their subjects with less moderation than we do. The secret being is that where force can be used, law is not needed. You know, but our subjects, as are so habituated to associate with us as equals, that any defeat, whatever, that clashes with their notion of justice, whenever it proceeds from a legal judgment or from the power which our league gives us, makes them forget to be grateful for being allowed to retain most of their possessions, and more vexed at being taken that if we had than if we had from the first cast law aside and openly grafted over covertness, openly grafted our covetous, covetousness, and our desire, covet to want your things, is grabbed. If we had done so, they would not have disputed that the weakness must give way to the stronger. Men's indignation, it seems, is more excited by legal wrong than by violent wrong. The first looks like being cheated by an equal, the second like being compelled by a superior. At all events, they contrive to put up as much the worse treatment than this from the Persians. Yet they think our rule severe, and this is to be expected, for the present always weighs heavily on the conquered. In other words, now we may be ruining them this thing, but we're not. The Persians were worse, okay, and therefore they don't remember that, okay. Um, um, and the present and the conquered or the inferior always feel that the resentment of that, he says. At least, this is at least certain. If you were to succeed in overthrowing us and take our place, you will speedily lose the popularity with which fear of us has invested you. If your policy now were to be like, uh, um, if your policy were now to be at all like the sample you gave during the brief period of your command against the Mede, not only is your life at home not only is your life at home regulated by rules and institutions incompatible with those of others, but your citizens abroad act neither on those rules nor those which are recognized in the rest of Hellenes. So he's saying, okay, careful. The way you organize your things at home, basically, your way you're slaving the Helots, right, and the Spartan reality, that will be unacceptable by all the other Greek cities. So if you do what you do here and there, no, it won't last long. You'll be more hated than we are. Uh, and second of all, your citizens don't act the way they don't behave the way they behave home. They behave differently abroad. So therefore, your characters can be changing like this. So now, 78. Take time then in forming your resolution, as the matters of great importance are not persuaded by the opinions and complaints of others. So bring trouble on yourselves, but consider the vast influence on the count of in war before you are engaged in it. As it continues, it generally becomes the affairs of chance, and chance from which neither of us accept. And those events we must risk in the dark. In other words, be careful before you do make your decision, because at war, chance can take up. Okay, right now we have a chance to not do this, but if we go to war, nothing is guaranteed, and we run the risk that chance can take a role in this, and that we can't see in the dark. It is a common mistake to go in going to war to begin to at the end at the wrong end, to act first and wait for disaster to discuss the matter. But we are not yet by any means so misguided, nor so far as we can see are you, according while it is still open to us both to choose aright. We bid you not to dissolve the treaty or to break your oaths, but have our differences settled by arbitration according to our agreement. Or lest we shall take the God who traveled under oaths to witness that you began the hostilities. Whatever line of action you choose, we will endeavor to defend ourselves against you. Such were the words of the Athenians. And the Spartans, having heard the complaints of the allies against the Athenians and the observation of the adder, they made all withdraw, consulted by themselves on the question before them. The opinions of the majority all led to the same conclusions. The Athenians were the open aggressor, and the war must be declared. But Amadeus, the Spartan king, who had the reputation of being at once a wise and moderate man, came forward and made the following speech. So I'm going to stop here. We're going to return back to 78 when we do it. We'll end at the moment before that, and we'll give Amadeus speech because we've been on too long. Okay, if you have any questions, put the questions on below. Like it if you like what I said. Now you put the question below, and I will respond. If you like it, please like it. Share it with a friend. Subscribe. You want to see more of this, and you can follow me below on social media below. Okay. Well, that's it.